Good morning, everyone. Very lively group, I have to say. Very noisy, which is a good sign. When lots of noise, lots of friendship. I travelled from Sydney, obviously, last night, and I always make myself available where possible to Rotary, Lions, Catholic Women's League and Country Women's Association, because I believe that you do incredible work, and I'm really honoured to be able to address you. I guess every day Rotary clubs are performing miracles in their community every day, and I think you need to really applaud yourself for the incredible work that Rotary does across the nation. Last year in the Reader's Digest survey, I was named the 7th most trusted person in Australia. The reason for that was amazingly, in some ways, silly. I was given that award because I spoke out on behalf of youth who were put down by everyone else. And I'm thinking, how bizarre is that? You know, the fact that I speak out for kids when everyone else puts them down was quite staggering. And I would hope that that's not true. And I would hope that we as a group support our young people, even when they do bad things. And I think when kids do bad things, we ask the question, why? And when you get the answers, you'll realise that we need to go down a different path of looking after our kids. Otherwise, the violence will keep escalating, as I've guaranteed for the last 36 years that I've been working with disadvantaged kids. I recently, last year, I don't know if you get the news up in this beautiful part of the world, you probably turn the news off, to be honest. I do that myself pretty much nowadays. But last year there was a review handed down about juvenile justice in New South Wales, and the Premier basically threw the report in the bin and said we were not going to embrace that review. I was pretty angry about that because for 20 years I had been working on and fighting with politicians to do juvenile justice differently, saying that locking kids up is proven not to work. It simply doesn't fix kids. And putting a young person in a facility like that in the first place, it will ensure that they become recidivists over time. So we need to look at other ways of dealing with kids, having drug and alcohol programs, dealing with violent kids in a different way to others, looking at supporting families, all sorts of ways to keep kids out. But the Premier then said, no way, we're not going forward with this. And so what she committed to was, in 3 years' time, we will need to build more juvenile detention centres, because we'll go from about 450 kids in custody right now to 770 kids in 3 years, costing about $186 million to build the new facilities and then $56 million to run those new facilities each year. Incredible long-term vision. If you actually looked at long-term, the review gave ways of decreasing costs, but she was committed, and so I had to make a point, and I wrote to the then Premier and said, look, I think you're a lovely lady and a good friend and all that sort of stuff, but I have to speak out against you, and I will resign from your Homelessness Council to make a point. And I made that point really clear to her, saying it's not personal, but I just can't be quiet when it comes to defending young people. Let's have a look at just who we have in juvenile detention centres. When I looked at the figures, many of the kids who are in detentions are victims themselves. 48% of the juvenile population, detention population, are Aboriginal. 48%. They make up 2% of the youth population in New South Wales. 12% have an intellectual disability. 26% of the boys and 38% of the girls are what we used to call state wards or out-of-home care. These are kids that are the most traumatised kids you'll ever encounter. And in this state alone, there's about up to 160 young people every year are killed in their homes, usually by parents. These are the kids that we are now locking up if they do something bad. These give you an example of the sort of kids I'm talking about. Remember little Shahaley, who died up in the Central Coast at the age of 7, weighing 9 kilograms in weight, starved to death, and lived in intolerable, filthy conditions with socks welded to her feet because they hadn't been removed for so long. And in the same week, we read of a little boy, 3 years of age, who was thrown into a suitcase and thrown into a duck pond, killed by his mother. We have up to 160 every year of those kids, and I don't know where they get lost. I don't know why we don't know about them. I don't know why we as a nation don't protest their incredible deaths. When we look at kids in out-of-home care, and I'll describe those. They're the most traumatised kids you will ever meet, and the last place they should be put in are juvenile detention centres. We've got a couple of, we also look at out-of-home care, and are they difficult? Absolutely difficult. They can smash your house up to the value of $50,000 in one couple of hours. And we try and work with them without saying we're locking you up for that, because we know the pain that they've been through, the trauma that they've been through, and the fact that it will take 2 to 3 years to be able to turn that around. I'll give you an example of one of those kids. A young man who at the age of 14 was with us for 12 months. Every time I went into the school or into the place where he was living, he would come to meet me, shake my hand and talk very politely, but I kept reflecting over those 12 months, I'd never seen him smile. And I have a theory about that, and you people would know better than me if this theory's right or wrong, because I'm not a baby person, but I'm told when parents bring a baby home, the baby tries to engage the parents at every level they can. They'll smile and make noises, and they'll smile and smile and smile. If in the first 6 months no one returns that smile, the smile dies for a long time. And in fact, forever, if that kid doesn't get some sort of therapy. When that smile dies, that child gets the message, there is no one who loves you or cares for you. And then they have to learn to negotiate the way life goes for them. They don't know how to make friends, they don't know how to love, they don't know how to play by the rules. And these kids become sociopaths, but they're not born that way, and you can undo it. And with this kid, I'm sure that he was one of these kids who no one ever looked over that bassinet and smiled, and therefore he has become, in a sense, feelingless. They have no empathy, therefore can do incredible violence because they don't care about anyone else because no one's cared about them. This young man didn't lash out at other people. He lashed out at himself, and he would go into, we had to watch him when we were at service stations, he'd go into the toilets, into the sharps containers, get needles out of the sharp containers and just jab himself with all the needles he would just find. He would cut his arms, just slash them up, as they say. And on the last day that we had him, he was running across a paddock and fell on a bottle, a broken bottle, cutting his wrist here. If it had been you or I hope you're as sane as I am. If you fell on it, you'd go, oh, does that really hurt? He didn't. He went the opposite. He pushed it right in, cut all his tendons across here, and had to go to Bowral Hospital, where we begged and finally got through to docs that this kid needed specialist mental health care, and he's now in that care. However, he has both his arms plastered from here to here, so he can't cut his arms. These kids, if they step out of line, the state government, the last state government anyway, and I have no political affiliation, so I will attack either party. It doesn't worry me what their names are. If it comes to kids, I'll speak out. And I guess we eventually got this kid into care. But there are lots of those kids who have been through that incredible trauma who we just throw into a juvenile detention cell. And it simply isn't good enough. We have one difficult kid at the moment who's really difficult. And we say to doctors, we need support. And they said, look, why don't you just lock him up into juvenile detention? That takes us out of the picture so we don't have to pay. They don't say that, I know what they're saying though. And we'll exit that kid through the juvenile justice system. So we'll hold him there till he's 18 and exit him, no one will care about him. That simply, I believe, is not good enough. I keep saying to people, and if I've spoken before, this saying might be repeated, but I'm sure if I spoke to you 5 years ago, you wouldn't have a clue what I spoke about. I'm not that arrogant, but the saying I have is behaviour is language. When we see bad behaviour, we actually got to say, what does that mean? And I've gone back, I've spent 2 years out of the classroom, and I've gone back into the classroom saying to the teachers, I'm only doing year 11 and 12 because I've done all the discipline and boundary setting. I walk into this group of year 11 kids, mainly boys, unfortunately. The girls tend to calm them down if you've got more girls, and they don't muck around in class. And I start the class, and one of them starts whistling, another one starts singing, another one's tearing around on his chair, and I eventually said, stop this now. I'm thinking, you're 18, some of you guys, what are you doing this for? And I decided I was going to be really, really tough on them and say, look, it's not acceptable you behave like this. I understand, though, where that behaviour comes from, and while I fight that behaviour, I will also acknowledge how difficult it is for them to be in that classroom. And I'll give you an example of a young guy just last week who was in class. He was a bit unsettled, and I sort of nailed him and told him to be quiet and do his work, which he did. And he came up after class and he said, "Father, can I speak to you?" And I said, "Look, I'm really busy. You'll have to run with me to the car and tell me what you want." As we stepped out of the classroom, his first words were, "Father, I was raped yesterday." And I said to him, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't give you time to be able to tell me that." And as I looked at him, I could see that he had accepted that. He'd had a lifetime of being sexually assaulted. And I said, "What are you going to do about this?" And he said, "I was going to do nothing, but I'm worried this man will do it to other kids." He wasn't worried about himself because he had endured that all his life. And this small 17-year-old boy gets raped the day before. And that, I think, just tells you when you see kids acting out, you've got to understand their behaviour. You don't have to approve of their behaviour. And as I said, I'm very tough, but I will walk up to them and say very close, and I'll say, "Stop this now." And then I'll walk up and say, "I know this is hard for you to do this, but you've got to expect me to fight for you and to push you. And if I don't do that, you won't respect me because you won't get the qualifications that you need so badly." And so it's a constant push and then acknowledgement. And as that boy said to me, and I guess that's the other thing which kids who go through the system have, is the ability they don't thrive. And that kid, the 17-year-old, is very, very small, and a lot of the kids we deal with are very small, and we call that the failure to thrive syndrome. That can come about equally from lack of food, but as powerfully, and you guys would do that with kids and grandkids, but also with lack of love. Kids fail to thrive physically when love is taken from them. And it's that incredible experience of this love taken from kids that means their bodies shrivel up. And I don't know how this guy overpowered this 17-year-old, but he was small, and this guy, I guess, has been well known and has been caught, and this kid is prepared to move on that. Another kid in class came in, and he was really restless, and he was very, very bright. And when I read his file, he'd been on the streets for 2 years, totally on the street, out of control, running wild 2 years. He had given up taking ice 2 weeks before he entered my classroom. And he's extremely intelligent. So I'd be saying, "Yeah, sit down and do your work and be quiet," and walk up very close and say, "I know this is hard for you. I don't know how you can sit in this classroom for 40 minutes or an hour, given the background that you've actually come from." So I guess today we need to look at why young people are doing bad things, and we as a nation, I just wish it would be fantastic if somehow Rotary could do something for our young people like you did for polio across the world, where you advocate for our kids and not allow people to just constantly put them down, and advocate that if we are intervene with young people, the chances of changing those sorts of behaviours is very, very effective. Every week we are asked to do a whole variety of things. Last week, 2 desperate pleas came in. One was from Alice Springs, where the lady there described, "We need you desperately," and I said to her, "You don't go rushing into Aboriginal communities, and my Aboriginal team will have to look at that." But they were talking about 6-year-olds involved in gangs, 10-year-old girls involved in prostitution for the price of 1 can of beer, gangs of kids marauding around the town out of control. And what's the government doing? Building a juvenile detention centre next to the jail in Alice Springs. That will be guaranteed to fail and escalate levels of violence. We have to do things in communities to heal them, not punish them. And we've got this almost retribution where we want to punish and get kids, anyone who does anything wrong, really make them hurt. And I kept saying to Bob Carr in the 10 years he was Premier that the further you push kids away, the harder they will come back in. And he kept the detention centre syndrome going, and that has kept escalating. Burke was another town that we were asked to move into, and again, an Aboriginal area, so my Aboriginal team who moved very slowly, you have to respect the elders and do it very differently. But again, out of control kids with nothing to do. We work in Blacktown, for example, that is the largest suburb, I think, in Australia. It has 300,000 people in the suburb. 27% of its population are under 18, and 35% of the population under 25. Highest crime rates in every area in the state, and not surprising because there's nothing for kids to do. And there's 200 different communities there working and living in that area. I'll give you a bit of a snapshot of where we work right across southwest Sydney. Our toughest town, I have to say, and I don't know if I've made any inroad, is Walgett. I don't think anyone from Walgett here. It's a tough town, I tell you. I tell people to keep driving through. You don't know. I don't know if I've made any impact there, except the only funny experience I had was on the first Christmas, and we have Christmas there, and over 400 kids turn up. The actual bingo stops on the day that we have our Christmas party there. And I sat down and I started eating, and the kids lined up, and the two little Aboriginal boys were whispering about me. I said, "What are you boys saying about me?" And if it had been white kids, they would have said, "No, nothing, Father, nothing." But their eyes were wide, and they looked at me and they said, "We thought you might eat all the food." And I thought, yes, I have put on a bit of weight. But I always ask the question when it comes to Aboriginal. I always go and ask my Aboriginal manager, and I said, "You know those little buggers said to me?" And she said, she laughed, and she said, "But in Walgett, it's traditional, or it's practice, not traditional, it's practice that the adults sit down to eat first and often leave nothing for the kids." And again, I'm just thinking, how bizarre is this, where kids, and in some suburbs and areas we work, we estimate 80% of the kids are being abused, and it's taken for granted and accepted. So it's really hard to break into those sort of areas where abuse is I guess, overwhelming, and a sense of hopelessness also engulfs whole communities. So we need, if we can get Rotary to become outspoken, to challenge, get signatures, a sign that we've got to look at doing kids differently. It's almost as if we need a Martin Luther King speech where it comes out, a new dream has to come about. And it's a dream about restorative justice. And restorative justice, I'm a teacher, so when you want me to stop, you ring a bell and I stop. I don't respond to light side. When lights go down, I can't control my class because I can't see them. But I think if you could, looking at restorative justice, that is, kids made aware of what they've done wrong and they have to fix the problem, rather than throwing them into a juvenile detention centre where no rehabilitation is done, where they're not made aware of what they've done, they don't feel any remorse whatsoever. But going through restorative justice, where you actually say to the kids, and we run schools along those lines of restorative justice, okay, you've hurt someone in this classroom, let's talk now, sit down and have a talk about this. And they were on camp last week, and the kids at midnight, they were looking after our kids have to do volunteer work. I think it's the best thing kids can do. And they took a group of kids with disabilities on camp. And at 12 o'clock, there was a problem between our students. And they went to the teachers and said, "We need an RJ, which is a restorative justice." And I said, "Wow, this has only been operating for 3 months." And they said, "And we don't want any teachers in the room," which was fantastic. They went into a room, had a restorative justice session with each other, resolved that, walked out of the room and went on with life. A lot of people will say that I'm a bleeding heart. I can assure you I'm not. I'm extremely tough on kids, but we don't make kids feel worthless and bad, because that actually leads to escalations of violence as well, that sort of stuff. And one of the other things, very simply, if a kid is fatherless, for example, much more likely to be involved in violence. So there's real things in kids' lives that impact on their behaviour. So if I could just have a think, if you can, I just think Rotary has an incredible power. Maybe nationally we can actually start fighting for the rights of our kids, even the ones who are bad. Because if we don't fix them, they will hurt this community, hurt our nation for the rest of their lives. If we can actually stop them at 13, 14, 15, 16, we can actually turn their lives around, because their brains are still developing, particularly boys' brains develop to 25, because our brains are much bigger, I think. And then I can get away with that because I'm a feminist, very much so. So I can get away with that. I've got most of my staff are female, so being a feminist I can say that. But we need to say to people, we've got to do this differently, and we as a nation are concerned, and make politicians really accountable for what they do. As I said at the beginning, I think you people are amazing. Do you want me to stop? No. I don't want to. I'm determined I'm not going to get you running late. Sorry? 5 minutes. Has anyone got any questions in that 5 minutes? Yep?
Could you tell us about your farm in the Southern Islands?
Yeah, we don't. That's not very significant in Youth Off the Streets now. We have very few kids down there, and we've changed our profile significantly over the last 8 years. We work into communities now, and we're known to move in very quickly. So after the riots in Macquarie Fields, we were there within weeks. After the stabbings and shootings in Rose Meadows 18 months ago, we were there within 24 hours. In Griffith, down in the Riverina, when a young boy was killed in a fight on New Year's Day, we were there again within 24 hours. Admittedly, in Rose Meadows and Griffith, I was working with the media. I was with the Current Affair in Griffith, and after they thought I would get more access to the community, and I did get access to the community, but afterwards the community came to me and said, after I put the cameras down, they said, "Are you coming to help us?" And I'm foolish. I said, "Yeah, I'll be back in 24 hours. So I flew home, had my Great Dane dogs in the car, the trainees from Macquarie Fields, my horse even, so I could patrol the streets at night in Griffith, and was down there within 24 hours, and then committed to being at that town. Everyone is desperate to have me in their area until I open my mouth, and then they say, "Will you please go away?" So when I went on national TV with Sunrise saying that I felt Griffith had deep ingrained racism, the mayor went to the local newspaper and told me to get out of town. And I responded, "Well, I think the days of cowboys are over. You're not going to tell me to get out of your town. I'm here, bad luck." And then a week later I went on Sunrise again and declared that we had found there were girls as young as 10 going up to the pubs and clubs in that town, prostituting for the price of 1 can of beer. So again, the mayor was just furious at me. And I lose no sleep over anyone's fury, I have to say. And I'm sure he spent a lot of sleepless nights over me, and was out at mayor at the next election. So and a lot of people in that town would come up secretly to me and say, "We know we've got to change, but no one from inside the community can do it." And what you're saying is true. And we just don't make those statements. We actually try to fix that. So what we then did, and we employed trainees from the area, we employed young people from that area who are now all qualified youth workers. They would go to the pubs and clubs at night at 3 in the morning. They would know the girls, and they would convince them to get in the car and take them home. So we actually turned it around. We just didn't say, "There's a problem," but we will fix the problem. Thank you, and I just think you guys are fantastic.
That's it. Big round of applause. I'd like to now call on Assistant Governor Brenda to do a vote of thanks, and Father Chris tells me in the friendship room he has his books and he's happy to sign them there for you. Thank you.
I'm honoured to be the thank you person, Father Chris. I admire what you do. I think everybody in this room admires what you do. You've got a lot on your plate, and from District 9640, that's what we're giving you. Put it on. A plate for you to put on government changes. You've got a gold ribbon. You could have had a blue one, but you got a gold star from District 9640. Thank you.